Welcome to another Northern Monkeys datasheet review. This time we're looking at the Ballistus Dreadnought, a unit that's kind of yo-yoed up and down in points this edition. So let's look into why that is. So here he is, the Ballistus Dreadnought. Now, when this model first came out and was on like the Warhammer community articles, I thought this thing looked so rubbish, like just really bad. But I think it was a classic Games Workshop paint job, and pictures that they took really didn't do this guy justice. And having the model in person, I actually think it's quite cool. Got it in Leviathan like everyone else. So, and I originally was like, oh yeah, this is just good. It's just a solid Space Marine anti-tank piece. But getting into it, it's basically a pair of guns walking around the battlefield. But he walks the walk. So he's movement 8, quite fast. Got decent toughness 10, so he's like more tough than your melter weaponry. So that keeps him kind of safe from stuff like that. And he importantly has a 2-up armor save, which is really big. Just because it essentially acts as an invuln against the vast majority of things, especially the way cover works this edition. You know, vehicles almost always get cover just for having slight parts of them obscured. So it's pretty good having all this durability on him. Right now, he was as cheap as 130 points. He came down from like 160 and just went down and down till being 130. And then he was sort of too good all of a sudden, and now he's 140. But he's still very good, still very much taken. And he's got OC4 as well. This is very good. Like, vehicles usually average around OC3. So just getting 4 on this guy, it makes him great for like holding objectives. You know, you can't, if you like a small unit of OC1 guys won't just be able to steal an objective off him. It's really nice stats overall. And his guns really add to that. So he's got essentially 2 las cannon shots, 2 missile launcher shots. But the missile launcher shots are strength 5 when they go blast. It's just really solid. He just puts down 4 decent enough anti-tank shots. And with his Ballista Strike, he gets to reroll hits against anything that's not below half strength. So essentially, even if you're off of momenting an infantry unit of your opponents, this guy will still be super efficient shooting into your enemy tanks that are on the backfield. So yeah, just really good all round. He's I think the strength of this guy is that there's no fat on this model. You know, you're not paying points for stuff you don't want. Like, he's got good movement, he's got good toughness, he has good guns, his ability synergizes with that. There's nothing like weird and extra that you're paying for, which you sometimes are in Space Marines. It's just all good stuff. So yeah, like I said, he's surprisingly durable. Don't forget this guy will have access to Armour of Contempt, so, you know, even like AP4 stuff, if it's shooting at him while he's in cover, he's still getting like a 5-up or 4-up save. It's just really strong. And I think that like takes a lot of people like time to learn, that just like, oh yeah, as he went down in points this edition, eventually you were paying like 390 points for 3 of these guys, and it's just like, it's, you know, 30 wounds with a 2-up save at T10. It's just really tough to kill. And one of the things that people sort of miss about this guy is that his guns have such long range that often stuff like Melter, like things that actually are good at getting through that armor save, they're not in range of him to shoot him back. So he's firing away at enemy vehicles, but those like little Melter units just can't get to him because he can play so safe. And also that massive base with OC4 makes him really good at holding objectives, just because of how much space he can take up at the back of the battlefield to screen out deep strikers. There's just a lot of good things to like about the Ballistus. And something that is quite funny, he does actually have 5 attacks that hit on 3s in melee. This guy will, like, you know, a unit of Swooping Hawks comes jumping down and blast away at some of your guys. This guy will walk over and just kick a couple of those to death. It's really quite funny. Because, yeah, people just don't expect him to have quite that many attacks. So he can definitely kind of shoo really light infantry off objectives. So overall, he's just been an increasingly popular unit this edition, and I don't know, it's just, there's nothing to not like about him. He's just really efficient for his points, even though his attacks can be a little bit swingy. So a lot of people, I think, put him on the table early on in the edition. You know, they got him in Leviathan like I did. And then they tried a game with him, and maybe just he was a bit swingy and missed and didn't do what they wanted, and people just sort of like, don't love this model, can't be bothered painting it up, because, I mean, it's quite the big hull to paint up. But I do genuinely think he's really great. Especially now that he's coming down in points. You know, I think where he is right now, he could probably at 150. I'd still take this guy. So maybe he'll go back up and do the full like spiral of his points. But I like to use him on flanks. He cuts angles really, really nicely because of that really long range. He sort of uses his big base so that he can block out your deployment zones, and then even on like proper competitive terrain layouts, there's usually like one very long like firing lane, and with his missiles and las cannons, he can really take advantage of that to like punish enemies. And it's a decent amount of volume, you know. It's still 4 shots, and you know they work. You kill a few high power infantry models really, really easily. Like in this game, he was blasting up piranhas. That was really, really nice. It's just a great unit, and he is swingy. I'll give you that. You know, sometimes you can just fail to wound. You know, he gets hit rerolls, but sometimes he still misses, and you can just sometimes fail to wound. Your opponent spikes an armor save. It's at that point where that's just possible. But I still think he's a really solid anti-tank piece. He's very, very cheap at 140. You know, and once you start to get kind of a critical mass of this guy, I'm not saying to go out and buy loads of this guy, but 2 ballistas is exponentially better than like 1 ballistas. It's like more than just twice as good, you know, because you just start getting consistency. And again, it's only like 280 points for both of those guys, so maybe it's worth it, but I still like 1 ballistas just for plinking at enemies. And often your opponent just sort of has to ignore him because he's very, very durable. You know, even especially at ranged, like a lot of shots will just sort of bounce off him, or even if they do kill him a little bit, he still has full hit rerolls, so you don't mind that. It's fine. Like, he's just really, really good for 140. I've always just liked him. And I think one cool thing about him is that he's very independent from the rest of your list. You know, like I said, if you've got some big enemy unit that shoved its way up forward, you can oath it and attack it with the rest of your army. Meanwhile, the ballistas is picking on more like choice targets that are more hidden from the rest of your army. He doesn't need that oath of moment reroll, which I think makes him super, super efficient. However, it is cool sometimes to put him into the oath of moment target because the +1 to wound is absolutely deadly on this guy. And there's lots of ways to boost his damage without too much investment, which I think is what you really should look for with this guy. So while I was looking online, I did realise there is almost like no official art of the ballistas. Like, GW really haven't bothered to like give this guy any kind of an art piece, which I think is a bit of a shame because he can be a very cool looking model, although he's a little top heavy perhaps for some people. But yeah, there's a few good detachments to put this guy in. Ironstorm is the really, really good home for this guy. That's the vehicle detachment. Now basically the detachment rule itself is just absolutely amazing for this guy. You can reroll 1 hit, 1 wound, or 1 damage roll. Now, the reason this is great is because he already rerolls hits, so you essentially get to reroll either a failed wound with your las cannon, which is really high value, or you can even, if you already wound anyway, you can just reroll one of the damage rolls. Say you roll a 1 or a 2, just try and spike that. Converting a 1 into a 5 or a 6 is just absolutely fantastic. And he's always going to be doing big damage in that. It's definitely the natural home for him. There are a couple of enhancements and stratagems that really affect him well. You know, there's stuff like Adept of the Omnissiah. This lets you blank a damage, I believe. And this is basically just means that the ballistas is just never going to die, unless it's like some absolutely nuts anti-tank shooting that goes into him. If you have a Tech Marine hanging around who can blank a damage on him, they become such a pain to kill for your enemy that they just simply stop becoming worth it. And of course, target augury web, giving this guy lethal hits. He has full hit rerolls, so you could almost fish for lethals if you wanted to. But otherwise, it's just a nice little damage buff for this guy. You know, you won't regret putting it on him. Even though it's only 4 shots, the full rerolls, they just make it a bit more likely that you're going to get value out of it. So yeah, Ironstorm, most vehicles do well in Ironstorm, but particularly the ballistas, just because he has that excellent like quality of shots, even though they're low volume. Personally, I'll always wave the flag for Gladius. He's absolutely great in that. Being able to have access to advance and shoot is really, really cool for the ballistas. He's already moved 8, so when you get to advance as well, you know, you potentially like move 10, 12, whatever. It just makes him very, very able to get those angles I was talking about. Like, it can be very, very safe to begin with, and then kind of pop out and even get shots into enemies where they don't have cover, which is really nice. Now, He can also have access in that detachment to the Storm of Fire stratagem, which potentially gives him +1 AP if you're in the right doctrine, but also gives him ignores cover. And this is really, really nice because, you know, AP4 ignores cover on the las cannons is fantastic, and getting the AP up on the missile launcher, that's really, really good, especially with the ignores cover. One thing to talk about with this guy is the rocket launcher is multi-purpose. It can like blast and do loads of shots. So suddenly those being like 2d6 shots, strength 5, rerolling hits, and then make them AP1 ignores cover. The Gladius does actually get that multi-purpose to be able to shred enemy units like Banshees that are really popular. Krieg Guardsman squads will really take a heavy loss under this guy's firepower. And there's nothing wrong with splitting those shots. You know, the las cannons can go into a tank, the missiles can go into a guard squad, and there's nothing stopping that from happening. You know, he doesn't lose his rerolls or anything. It's just a really, really good thing to have. So those stratagems that can boost those rocket launchers, really, really nice. And Firestorm Assault, I think I don't really see this guy ever running Firestorm Assault, but it seems quite good, really. It gives him permanent advance and shoot, which I've already spoken about being really good. And yeah, so that's just brilliant. He just gets to, I think you've got all those flamers up front to like destroy enemy infantry. So having a few ballistas on the backfield might be really, really handy. And potentially if you need to use the ballistas to advance up and get in close, maybe to contest an objective, he can also then get his las cannons to strength 13 with the detachment rule. So that's actually quite fun. If you can get within 12, you get +1 strength to your ranged attacks. So just really, really cool, I think. It's just a nice little buff for him there. I've never seen it, I've never played it, so I can't speak with too much authority. But it's just something that I think would be cool. So lastly, let's talk about, does this guy need a leader? Which, since he's a vehicle, there isn't really any synergistic leader you can put in the squad. But you could take a Tech Marine with him. Should you do this with a Ballistus? No. I'd just say no, not at all. Not only is a Tech Marine like almost half the points of the Ballistus to some degree, he just, the buff, the +1 to hit, the Ballistus already has built-in rerolls, he doesn't really need it, and he simply doesn't need that babysitter. I think other tanks, like a big Land Raider who's putting out so many shots, maybe he benefits from it, and it'll make your Ballistus harder to kill if you're able to repair it every turn, but like I said, most enemies simply don't bother to kill the Ballistus, because they've got more pressing matters to deal with. So I don't think the Tech Marine's really necessary there. And you won't even get synergy out of the Tech Marine's like melee potential because he'd be sat at the back with the Ballistus. I just don't think it's really worth it. However, the strength of the Ballistus really is that he doesn't need any support pieces. He doesn't need Oath of Moment. He doesn't need stratagems. He doesn't need a Tech Marine sat around helping him out. The Ballistus just sits at the back and does his business. And I think a lot of the times it will be swingy. Like, I've literally had a game where a Ballistus spent 2 rounds shooting at an enemy and didn't do anything, you know. They just passed their, you know, I failed to wound, they passed their saves, even, you know, like, sometimes your opponent just makes a couple of 5-up saves. And that was a shame, and then all of a sudden, that same tank that I've been shooting at all game with 0 effect, fired at it. Oh yeah, both the las cannons, went through. Oh, you failed both your saves. Oh, you take 11 damage and explode. Like, it's how it is with the Ballistus. Obviously, it's better if you're luckier and that happens turn 1, but even if it doesn't, the Ballistus can still put out consistent damage. And even into big, like, stat check armies where it's all heavy infantry, like, you know, Custodes, you still get value out of the Ballistus because he still is super efficient. It's only 140 points, and he's still firing out 4 decent shots around. It's just really, really nice. And at the end of the day, he's got that big base, he can hold your home objective, he can screen out enemy deep strikers. I just think he's a great unit, and I'd really recommend trying him out, even if you just have one to kind of be able to take those plink shots from the backfield. So thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed. The Ballistus is a strange unit. He came out and I thought he was fine. He was just kind of ignored because no one had the model or people weren't excited about the model. And as he dropped in points, he just became more and more efficient until the point that like most Space Marine lists were just triple Ballistus because it's just so efficient. Maybe he'll go up in points again because like this unit's great, and it was complete insanity that he was 130 points. Like that just, it's a bit crazy that he's 140 points. You know, he's so durable, and so shooty. It's just strange. But the meta waxes and wanes. Who knows? Maybe Ballistus up to 160 next edition. Who knows?